Hi, it's Harry Enton, your favorite CNN data guy. Singer-songwriter Neil Sedaka is a rarity in the music industry. His hit songs and decades-long career made him one of Billboard's most successful pop artists of all time. He also happens to be my uncle. Uncle Neil's story got me thinking, statistically, is that level of achievement still attainable in today's music business? On the latest Margins of Error, the story of Uncle Neil's hits and what it means to find success in a starkly different music industry. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Empire. The big idea is in 3D.
So if you're talking about, multi-planar movements, whether it's, something as simple as a chop or even a kettlebell swing or a trunk rotation, which is rotating, you need resistance or force to actually follow you throughout that entire rotational movement.
That's Sam Miller, founder and CEO of Proteus Motion, a company trying to change the training game through resistance. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. Sam Miller has a really cool backstory. He's trying to build off his father's legacy of fitness through modern science. And in doing so, he has created modern training mechanisms that even his dad couldn't envision. Our guest this week is Sam Miller. He's the founder and the CEO of Proteus Motion, which is a company that is attempting to reinvent resistance training. And they're focusing on the initiative of providing the most effective athletic and rehabilitation equipment on the market. Hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm doing great, Bram. How are you?
Give me some background of yourself first and then the company. How did you get into this?
Good question. So I started Proteus in 2015, kind of after drawing inspiration from my own childhood sports rehab experiences, as well as a mechanical prototype that was developed at MIT by my father in the early 90s. I started Proteus using my dad's original concepts, which kind of led to my own patented inventions. But really in my kind of own sports training and physical therapy, that we kind of meant to treat a painful joint condition that I had in my knee. I was super frustrated with equipment that was used in training and rehab that kind of only allowed me to train movements, let's say one muscle or muscle group at a time, which I didn't feel like was translating to my sport. And then on top of that, there was this lack of objective data around strength and power specifically. That was very much kind of one or two dimension focused, it's like a squat or a bench press. And we rotate, especially as athletes, but all people rotate and they move through multiple planes. And so there were some serious limitations there in the tools and technology. So I kind of started this to access the third dimension in both measuring and training physical strength and power, seeing this kind of huge opportunity to create a new frontier in this key pillar of human performance.
And what was your sport? What did you get injured in?
I mean, I played. I was one of those kids that grew up on a cul-de-sac, and there were 25 kids the same age, so we played every single sport. But my main sport was soccer. And
you took that cul-de-sac soccer game, it sounds very seriously, so much so that you injured yourself.
Yeah, it was
okay.
It went way beyond the cul-de-sac. It was school, club, all that stuff. I did the whole. For me, it started early when I was like 10, but I had the huge roller coaster moments and a lot of time in training and in physical therapy and then back again. And to me, it was there were some serious voids that existed, and then that kind of like built this foundation of, I guess, my understanding of the problem or a need for the data, which is around strength and power in three dimensions, on top of the kind of different and new abilities to train with resistance that's much more that translated more to kind of real life multiplanar movements.
Okay, so you mentioned your father had developed an original concept. Can you kind of tell me what that was and what you've built off of those original concepts?
Yeah, so my father was a really brilliant, or is a really brilliant kind of electrical and mechanical engineer. And in the early 90s, he was working in kind of as a visiting scientist in kind of a spin-off of the biomechanics lab at MIT. And he was developing concepts. He had this idea for developing a kind of a machine that allowed you to do exercises without inertia or gravity. The concept being that, inertias limits the kind of muscle activation that you can get because, for example, if you're doing something simple like a bicep curl even, it's kind of like those end ranges, the beginning and end range. You're not fully in control of the weight or the inertia that you experience due to gravity. And so you actually lose out on the benefit of training in those kind of end ranges of a movement, which happen to be the ranges that people typically get injured, the extreme ranges. So his idea was to develop some machine that was specifically for resistance training that allowed you to do kind of real life movements. So what he developed was a concept of this, it was a mechanical prototype concept that kind of allowed movement in 3 dimensions without resistance. Like he could only get resistance in 2 of the 3 dimensions. It's a super complex problem because there's a lever arm, and I won't even go into the physics behind it or the mechanical engineering behind it, but really, really challenging problem that he took on. So we developed this concept. It was kind of a show and tell piece to talk about, this, new potential type of training. So and he worked on this in like the basement of my house growing up for 20 years.
Huh.
And then kind of just fizzled out. He didn't really know what he wanted to do with it, or there were so many applications and it was super limited and he couldn't really get the technology that far along. So then there was a gap of about 10 years. I was super, super interested in kind of this space, especially as like starting in around 2012 with this like emergence of the quantified self movement and, this idea around, intelligent fitness training equipment. And for me, my whole thing was around, the idea that like, okay, well, if you look at wearables, for example, 24/7 wearables have created a $30 billion market in sleep and recovery, and the X-ray and the MRI has created a $60 billion market in body imaging and composition. But for strength and power, there's still this huge void. Strength is your ability to move against a force. Power is your ability to produce speed against a force. So to measure strength and power for movements that you perform in real life, like rotation, you need forces in 3 dimensions. So I got really excited about this, knowing that, hey, I could take my dad's kind of original concept. If I could make it work and actually produce resistance in all directions, then I could get data from it and turn that into kind of software products. So that's where I started. And since then, we've got, 4 or 5 at least issued patents, a number of new ones pending with, hundreds of claims. That's really around, resistance training in 3 dimensions, but almost more importantly, we've patented the first and only way to measure strength and power in a 3-dimensional space. And that has kind of unlocked this new frontier of human performance data and software products for everything from consumer fitness to physical rehab to sports training. And what enables that is this entirely new type of resistance training and workout experience that we've also patented and we call 3D resistance.
Okay, so I'll need you to bear with me here. I need you to dumb down 3 dimensions for me for a moment here. What is the 3rd dimension that you're speaking about when you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, it's just the 3 dimensions that we live in. You can think about it like, you can think about it by planes. If you kind of like split your body into three planes and directions. But maybe another way to think about it is, and we actually have a really exciting video that just that's coming out this week about this, of this illustration of the difference between Proteus 3D resistance and, a free weight and a cable machine. But so the idea though is that a cable machine can't match or mirror your movements as you move through multiple planes and directions. So like No matter where you move with a cable machine, for example, the force that you're experiencing is always along the rope or the cable towards the machine. No matter where you move, you're always being pulled back. In the case of a free weight, it's always downwards because of gravity. So no matter where you move, it's always downward resistance. But as you move, with a free weight, if you're not moving directly up, right, the resistance is not countering the direction of your movement exactly. And what this means is that the force that you experience changes throughout a movement. And so that makes it impossible to measure strength and power for anything but a basic movement in one direction, like a squat or a press or a row. So if you're talking about, multiplanar movements, whether it's, something as simple as a chop or even a kettlebell swing or a trunk rotation, which is rotating, you need resistance or force to actually follow you throughout that entire rotational movement so that you're engaged and you're strengthening the entire movement, but also so that you can actually measure, things like velocity, which against force turns into power. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
This video that we have coming out this week, I think is going to be a really helpful explainer here.
One more question on this idea. So of those other types of exercises that you're speaking about, the two-dimensional version exercises, they're done, I think, with the intent of getting a very specific and calculable result by doing those things. By doing the three-dimensional exercise that you're talking about, can you narrow down to the specific results you're trying to get out of the training or recovery, if that's what you're using it for?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. That's a short answer. There's kind of two serious benefits that are quite significant to the 3D resistance. One is on the training side, the muscle activation, the experience that your body actually has when you're training with 3D resistance, and the other is on the software and the analytics side. Really quickly, I'll start with the training benefit. Because the resistance is constant throughout any kind of movement pattern or range of motion, you're getting much more engagement. And we've actually clinically proven this in the motion lab of the Hospital for Special Surgeries, kind of a early partner of ours, that produces up to 95% greater neuromuscular stimulation. So your muscle is activated for there's a higher peak and a longer duration compared to free weights and cable machines. It's almost 2 times more effective in that regard. And it also produces this really, really engaging, unique, fundamentally different kind of workout experience that feels like you're training underwater. Super low impact, super high muscle activation, super, super efficient. On the software side, though, this is where things have gotten really interesting. And this is truly a new frontier of performance data. So we've got, we've kind of rolled these capabilities into really the beginnings of a very exciting software product that, for one example, we've got a series of like a test assessments or tests in our library in the kind of touchscreen kiosk on Proteus. And if you're shopping through those, some of those assessments are, strength and full body strength and power tests. You basically most of them are 3 to 5 minutes long. And the software guides you through a series of exercises. You do 17 exercises, for example, is one of our general strength and power tests. And it basically shows you across your entire body, things like, right to left side imbalances, deficiencies in strength versus power. How do you compare to like people? And that's just the beginning. And then it's starting to become more prescriptive. But one of the most interesting things that we found is that because of this ability to measure power in 3D space for the first time ever and strength, we did kind of an analysis on, I think it was 500 or so power reports of different kind of unique elite athletes that have done the test. We're capturing like 1 million data points a day. So we're kind of swimming in data here. And we found that the majority of those elite athletes that had tested on Proteus, they don't actually have deficiencies in strength. They have deficiencies in power.
Huh.
And what that means from a training perspective is you should be training this population, which is 56%, should be training at higher speeds and lighter resistance.
Huh. That's interesting, because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about, as someone who works in the NFL, I'm thinking about the combine. And all of these elite collegiate athletes come to Indianapolis once a year, and they perform a bunch of tests. I don't know there's any other way around of finding pure straight line speed than doing a 40-yard dash, but maybe you can tell me if there's a different way of doing something like that. But all of the other measurables that you get that honestly move players up and down are bench presses and squats and all these very traditional strength tests and somewhat endurance, but mainly strength tests. Are you suggesting here that even at the elite level, there are some other markers that, I don't know, football teams, baseball teams, basketball teams should be thinking about when they're trying to find the next great players?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. I mean, in our minds, it's a fact anyways. And our kind of customer base, which are, we're working with some of the best trainers and best athletes in the world across all major sports. I think they would agree as well. I think what we've identified is this, and don't get me wrong, like those foundational strength and those foundational movements and foundational strength, that's critical. That's a foundation that's needed for elite athletes. But where we see this opportunity that's missing is usable strength or strength efficiency. So it's like you have this strength, but you need to produce velocity, right? You basically generate power against a resistant force. And that's what we're able to uniquely measure and train incredibly well. And we actually have a number of professional football players that are using Proteus and have been for a while. And in fact, we're working very closely with Bobby Stroop, for example, in Kansas City, who works very closely with Patrick Mahomes. He's kind of come into the inner circle or top tier of kind of elite Proteus trainers that we collaborate with, along with Eric Cressy and some of those folks. But there's without question this huge kind of really this world that we've opened up, or this data has opened up into understanding a lot more than how much can you squat. It's really about what can you do with that. How can you perform dynamic movements, and how can you generate speed? And many times, those are actually the movements that translate or have, translate a lot more closely to a specific sport than, how high can you jump, how much can you squat, and certainly how much can you bench press. So we kind of have filled this void in performance data that is unbelievably exciting, and I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the coming weeks, months, and years for sure.
When we talk to a lot of founders about this kind of new wave, and you even described it as this mountain of data that you're swimming in, that you get on all of these athletes, whether they're high level or the weekend warriors, gathering about them. I always wonder, what's the educational gap of getting the information that you have about yourself or about the person that you're training and implementing it in real time to improve their ability? So how do you guys think through using the information that you have to make athletes better?
So I think from a data perspective, we've started to be much more selective about how much information we show, with knowing that the only way that data is valuable is if it informs something and can be actionable, right? So we have too much data, so let's not show all of it and just kind of let people on their own say, oh, that's interesting, or I don't really know what to do with this, et cetera, which is, a lot of our data that we're capturing in the background. So what we've done is we've really relied on very, very close partnerships with elite trainers that have helped us validate. And with their buy-in and kind of collaboration and exploration, that's actually informed some of the software products that we've started to develop. One example is, we work with Eric Cressy Sports Performance in the baseball space for, a couple of years now. First year and a half was like data capture and, spending a lot of time with him translating this information to his experiences and observations in the field with some of these professional baseball pitchers, right? Does this match up, and how, and then what he learned, and then we learned, is how important this information is, because it's kind of identifying some of these intangibles about athletes and athlete performance. So, and what I mean by that is like, either gut feelings that trainers have, either confirming or conflicting those, or just really providing this level of insights that's informing directly how they should be training, right? So we're really focused on, from a data perspective, not telling a trainer what to do. we're arming them with information that makes them make decisions a lot faster and totally legitimately, and empowering them to deliver higher quality of services to the athletes that they work with. And that's been incredibly effective as an approach, but also from a brand building and credibility standpoint. We do not have a black box. I mean, fortunately, we have this proprietary data set. We have the world's first and only data set of three-dimensional strength and power. It's growing by 1 million data points a day. So fortunately, we don't have to, there's not a lot of smoke and mirrors here. It's just like, here's the information. What we've gone to great efforts doing, and this is really expanding, is turning that into engaging software products, which are actionable and in many cases prescriptive. And that's often a gateway to discovering and using Proteus as a training tool in conjunction with the other tools that you're using for resistance training.
All right, last thing. Obviously, if leagues or elite athletes want to get a hold of you and do this, that's probably easier said than done. What about the average person that wants to get into this, use this? Where would they find it? How would they go about it?
Sure. So we've got, close to 70 machines installed right now. We've got actually we're going to be doubling that base in the next 6 months, in the next 6 weeks. So by the end of January, we'll have, there's certainly more than 100, but more than 125 machines installed. A lot of our clients, I should say, are, they're really businesses right now. It's B2B initially. But they're businesses that provide services to competitive athletes. And that's not just pro athletes. So we probably have a quarter of our total users, which is approaching kind of 10,000, I would imagine, that are using, or that are pro athletes. Another 50% are kind of youth athletes. And these are athletes of all sports and all ages and capabilities. We've got athletes, as young as 10, 8 to 10 years old. And then we've got, recreational tennis players that are in their late 70s that are using Proteus as both a training and a measurement tool. So getting in touch with our team for sure. In the next couple of months, we're actually going to have an updated website, which has a location of Proteus Finder, and driving folks that are interested in trying it out to their nearest Proteus location. We're in most major cities now, and then a lot of these businesses are really using. We've got populations of users that are non-athletes too, and that are just using it for a really effective and efficient training workout. That's a low impact, super high muscle activation, and full body can be done in under 10 minutes. So we've got a cohort of 45 to 65-year-old women right now, and that are, started the phrase "Do you Proteus," and they're doing training sessions, 15 minutes, 3 days a week, and paying $25 a session for it to some of these businesses. So there's a pretty wide audience that can benefit from using Proteus. And even though we're initially focused on these kind of elite competitive athletes right now.
Sam Miller is the founder and the CEO of Proteus Motion. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Bram. Thank you.
On the next Future Sport podcast, the tsunami of NFT collectibles. It's coming.
We really see the future as digitizing fandom. The way brands and fans and teams are interacting with their fans is online. And there are no real tangible digital goods for them in that space. And we're building tools to help digitize that fandom for them, now and 5 and 10 years down the road.
That's Grant Dexter, co-founder and CEO of Fanaply. He knows that soon the Christmas wish lists around the country will include digital collectibles. That'll do it for this episode. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein.